Good afternoon and welcome to today's CPG Speak session. I'm Jeff Freeman, President and CEO, Consumer Brands, and we're thrilled that you're with us. I'd like to start by thanking PwC for their support of the CPG Speak series and also Channel Advisor, who's today's session sponsor. We've got a big crowd for the session, so we want to jump right into this. That's no surprise given the stature of the speakers we have with us today. There's no question that the relationship between retailers and manufacturers is built on trust, understanding, and collaboration between those who make the goods and those who sell them. I'm pleased to be joined by three executives who know the importance of this relationship. Kathy Widmer, Company Group Chairman, North America and Latin America for Johnson & Johnson Consumer Health. Dean Banks, President, CEO, and Director with Tyson Foods. And Vivek Sankaran, President and CEO, Albertsons Companies. In today's session, we're going to cover three things. One, how we got here and what we've learned. Two, what we're seeing and how strong partnerships are crucial to success in this strange environment. And finally, where the consumer is going and where do CPG companies need to go from here. Dean, Kathy, Vivek, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I'd like to start by getting your perspective on the current environment, just let you riff for a little bit. Vivek, you came to Albertsons about 18 months ago after 10 years at PepsiCo. Talk a little bit about that transition, the most difficult aspects of that adjustment, perhaps.
The margins, Jeff. I love saying that. I love saying that. No, kidding aside. It's been a fascinating transformation for me from my professional life. And the biggest distinction I see is that in this business, in CPG, you were one step removed from the coal face, i.e. that interaction with that customer. You're right in the middle of it. And you realize that you're only as good as that last transaction you had with that customer. And so you've got to earn that at every single interaction. And what I'm seeing happening here in this industry is that, in the CPG business model, I don't mean this generally, but the brands are powerful. It buys you time. You can ride on momentum for a bit. And so you're improving the business model, and then you make changes to it. In our industry, if you just stayed with improving the business model, you're dead, right? And so it used to be that we would build an asset and that we think would invite a shopper, and we'd kind of tell her, we built the asset, we want you to shop it this way. And that's been turned on its head. So she's telling us, I want to shop it the way I like it, when I want it, where I want it. And you guys figure out the asset structure to do that, right? And so it's flipped entirely on its head. And this industry is going through a massive change. And it's just been fun being part of it.
Where perhaps do you have a leg up on some of your retail peers because of that decade plus on the CPG side?
In the CPG, and I talk about it from a management perspective, right? So there's all the knowledge that comes with it, how a CPG company works, how they make money, and so on, that we can bring into the relationships that we have with CPG companies, trying to further growth and trying to further productivity and such. But I think CPG companies have been historically held to a very high bar on top line growth and ROIC. You have to get past the tyranny of the or in CPG to be successful. You've got to do both. In everything you do, you got to find a way to do both. And I've brought that thinking certainly to our company, that I think and technology is a great enabler of that. And you've got to find ways to do both, get more growth and reduce costs at the same time, right? It's drive differentiation in certain things, yet get standardization. And you've got to find ways to do both. And so more than anything, I think it's the experience in a CPG company of having that management philosophy that's helped us here, or helped me here.
You were there about 10 months when COVID hit.
Yeah.
What had you already changed within those 10 months that, in looking back, I'm thankful I did this because we're better prepared because of it?
The most important thing that I think we did was we came together every 6 weeks in my first 10 months as the top 30 or 40 people in the company. And we spent 2 days together just talking about what our priorities are, what our strategy is, what we didn't like, what we like. And we had clarity on our plan. And we had started investing towards that. And when COVID hit, we just doubled down on those investments. Example of that is e-commerce. I had in my mind, we should grow 30% every year. We grew 276% in quarter one and 243, right? And nobody's complained about capacity. So I think there's just so much more in our companies that we can do. But I'm so thankful that if there's anything to be thankful for, nothing to be thankful for around COVID, but at least I had 10 months and we had got all those things in place and we could accelerate on it.
Thank you. Kathy, I'm going to turn to you. Obviously, J&J is at the center of keeping people safe. Everything from everyday concerns like Band-Aids to literally changing the world with the development of a COVID vaccine. Mm-hmm. So no pressure there. I imagine the pace within the company has been absolutely incredible. Talk a little bit about what you've confronted, some of the biggest challenges over the past 10 months.
So first of all, thanks for inviting me. Consumer Brands Association does really good work, especially now, and it's great to be here. I've been with J&J for 27 years, and I can honestly say that I've never been more proud to be at the company than I am right now. And when it comes to leadership challenges, I'm going to stray away a little bit from the initiatives themselves, because I think if I reflect on what's been the biggest leadership challenge, it's been in a lot of ways propping up leaders throughout the company to be able to take on the additional capacity that they have to take care of the whole person. Like we usually take care of the working person with some understanding of their entire world. But when this happened, and I think as I reflect on who people trust as their source of information or what to do or where to go, it's their employer. Suddenly it became the employer was the trusted source. And, I just reflect back on, what all of our leaders have needed to do to make it so that our talented colleagues can deliver on what they do day in and day out. And we were talking about this earlier, but we just have, I'm sure everyone else has experienced this too. We've had people mid-relocation with a family caught in the middle of not quite here, not quite there, and there's a quarantine in place, or single people who've been living alone, this entire time and all of the issues associated with that, or working parents who are overwhelmed. I mean, we've kind of seen it all. And from a leadership standpoint, I'm concerned about everyone, but it extends the gamut from people who work in our factories have been there since day one, or our labs, where it's not an option to do what we're doing here. We needed to quickly find ways to keep them safe, and you run the whole gamut of that all the way through to helping people manage remote work. It's for the thousands of leaders in J&J. While I'm concerned about everyone, I've recognized that it's a privilege and a burden to be a leader right now, and it's there's a tremendous amount of added capacity that everyone has had to add, and so when I reflect from a leadership standpoint, it's really about how we're taking care of our people.
How is that growing more challenging now that we can see a light at the end of the tunnel, but we kind of have our darkest days yet to go through? I mean, already December, January, February, it's going to be rough. So but yeah, we know on the other side of that, there's some hope. How do you?
Yeah. And I think that's, I do think we're sort of at this pivotal place where I think people are probably more scared, more worried than they've been this whole time, but are also tired of the limitations and the monotony that's associated with operating this way. In our company, we're both working very, very, in a very focused manner on the vaccine and the current dynamic, but also have an eye out to what it might be like mid-year next year, where where families and people are restoring rituals. And there's a lot of hope associated with that. There's also a lot of opportunity in the industry to consider what that means. It's not a typical, back to school kind of, scenario, but it's a back to rituals and human connection and experiences that we've all missed. And I think that hidden underneath there is a world of opportunity for industry to be thinking about what does that mean from a consumer insight standpoint, and how do you leverage on that?
Thank you. Dean, moving to you to get started here. You took on the CEO role in October, so obviously a glutton for punishment. You did that in the middle of a pandemic with an immense focus on worker safety, under tremendous political pressure, feeling the pain of a decline in the away from home category. Other than that, how's your 2020 been?
Jeff, it's been actually promising. I've been on the board for about 3 years, and I was president starting in January, and so I had about a month and a half under me whenever we'd really started seeing the pandemic surge. I might have been the only person in the company that knew what a coronavirus was prior to coming in. My background's in life sciences, and I didn't expect to be deploying it so quickly in a company with the business of Tyson. But it's been phenomenal in some ways. The challenges really help you see how the company operates. So trying times can bring a lot of focus, and health and safety has always been our top priority. But going through the crisis, much like Kathy said, we had team members that were really excited to go in and make sure that Albertsons shelves are stocked and our other customer shelves are stocked, and working throughout the entire supply chain. There were so many moments where we could have fallen down, and seeing that the team members really step up and exercise the flexibility and creativity, it taught us a lot about ourselves, and it was really, really encouraging. We had to put a lot of time, much like Kathy said as well, in communicating with our team members, giving them as much information as they possibly could have around what was going on with the virus. It took us a lot to learn. I think we were ordering masks, chartering planes from China with masks on them, but before the CDC even thought that they would be valuable and not introduce any additional risk. And so some of those right decisions, even closing facilities and doing mass testing, we were one of the first companies to actually find asymptomatic positives in the scale that they were out in the environment. And so those were hard decisions and challenging, but you're really empowered and supported by a lot of great people who are all focused on doing the right thing. And you mentioned the challenges in the food service business being obviously affected by the virus. The supply chain working with us and all of our production to be able to shift to put as much of that food on the retail shelves, and working with folks like Albertsons to get things rapidly relabeled. It would historically take us weeks, if not months, to get things relabeled, and they were able to work with us to get things turned around in just days. So it taught us a lot about what we can do. Even from an innovation perspective, nobody wants innovation to stop through a crisis. And we were able to work with customers like Albertsons on their private label products and actually make innovation happen with things like virtual cuttings. And it was really exciting to be at a place like Tyson. We learned a ton, and I think the scale really allowed us to operate with a lot of responsibility in how we worked with our community, how we helped feed customers and consumers, and advance the business along the way. So I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else in the world than here at Tyson through the crisis.
You mentioned moving the food service product into the retail market. It's an area, obviously, where industry deserves a lot of credit. I want to give credit as well to our partners at the FDA. We worked with them as well, making some of the changes need to be done there so we could be more nimble. And I think in multiple instances, the federal government has proven to be more nimble here than it would usually be. We've still got a lot of areas to improve, but that's one where I think they did some good things. Let me ask the group, each of you have strong consumer insights. As we enter into this next wave of COVID and these numbers we're seeing at levels we've never seen before, let me ask you, what are you seeing consumers doing? Are they listening to public health experts? Are they making what you think would be the right decisions, or is your level of concern increasing? I'll throw that out to all three of you.
Well, I'll jump in and say I think that I do think the level of concern is increasing because it's difficult to find a trusted source. And just coming back to what I said earlier, and then maybe it's because we're a healthcare company. I think our employees turn inside to try and understand the truth and what it means to them, and how how that impacts our business and how we engage with consumers is also the case. I mean, for us, it's just, this return, especially in healthcare, to trusted, high efficacy solutions that we're emphasizing at this moment, because that provides some security to families where there's nothing more important to them than the safety and the wellness of their family. So it's if anything, what we've believed in for years is absolutely front and center. But I do detect the concern about where's the trusted source of information.
I would add to that too, that there's a sense of proximity now. Some of our facilities the communities in which we were operating were hit really hard early in the crisis. And I remember, in time in California and then here in Arkansas and other places, there was a sense of distance with the disease. You felt it was out there and you were afraid of it. There was news about it, but it felt like there was some distance. I think with the surge that we're seeing now, it's pretty ubiquitous. And nearly everyone that I've talked to knows someone now who's contracted the disease and gone through it. And so where there was some hope in September that we might be seeing some of the disease dying down, we were investing heavily to make sure that all of our protective measures were going to be in place, because we knew that fatigue was setting in, and that might lead to a surge like what we've seen and what we're seeing coming out of the holidays. I think that fatigue comes in two ways. Obviously, in people's protections, personal protections, and in the environment in which they're living and engaging. The other is in food, in the job to be done related to food. We had seen what looked like maybe a return in food service and some return in some of our products that people are going out and eating, of course. But there's a bit of fatigue where people in the early stage of the virus, they were kind of enjoying reconnecting with people and cooking at home. Now now we're seeing some of the packaged prepared foods, either in the deli or in our prepared foods CPG business, continuing to grow because there's some fatigue of just even cooking at home. I think there's going to be a real desire to get back together as soon as we possibly can. But I think now it's real, and people are really taking necessary precautions.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing too, Jeff. I think I worry about fatigue. We are all tired. Everybody's tired of doing things the way we're doing it. And so, but we've got to get through these next 2 to 3 months. Kathleen's company and many others are preparing the vaccines and such, and we've got to get through these next 2-3 months. I think what we can all do is just re-emphasize and never stop talking about the safety measures we need to take, right? At work and outside work, just as much outside work as at work. And I think we've got to do that for a few more months, because that's my concern, that people are going to let their guard down.
That's right.
I think we all share that concern. Let me switch topics to the relationship between retailers and manufacturers, how that's been tested during these times, how it's been strengthened. Obviously, so much of that relationship is built on personal connections. Of course, there's a lot of co-development of strategies and data sharing and things like that, but it's built on personal connections. How have you maintained or strengthened your relationships in a time when face-to-face interaction just isn't happening in the way that we've done traditionally? Let me start. Vivek, why don't you start first? How you've done that with some of your CPG partners, and then I'll turn to Kathy and Dean.
Yeah, Jeff, let me point out something that I've never had to worry about in the last 10 months, despite all of the noise and the disturbance and the dissonance and what's going on. I've never had to worry that our CPG partners will always try to do the right thing, always try to do the right thing, that they will try to innovate their way around problems to make sure that the customer is supplied, that they will always ensure high quality and safety. I'd never had to, for 1 second, worry about that. And it's turned out just like that, right? So even if you take some of the I mean, I remember, Dean, just talking with Tyson in the early days of this pandemic. As we went through shortages, we would talk every week. We would talk every week to figure out what we can do differently to get chicken onto the shelf. And I thought the level of communication was so high. There was a higher degree of transparency than ever before, just a general acceptance of the problems and the reality that we're facing, a sense of speed in solving it. I'm hoping we continue to maintain that kind of a relationship. There was nobody trying to hoard information in these last 10 months, which is a fabulous thing.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'd love to just comment quickly, Jeff. It's just such a powerful thing when you're working with the supplier and you're sharing with them the things that you're having to do to adjust production, to take care of your people, and they don't flinch. They know that they and you want to take care of their customers, and there's an unflinching connection to all of the people who are both making the food and distributing the food and delivering the food. And even the flexibility around changing the product that may not be exactly what the customer would want, but making sure that food is available. There was a time when we were all really concerned about eating, and we knew COVID was going to potentially hurt people. We also knew that just hunger would as well. And folks like Albertsons, just phenomenal in that. And much like, for those of you who don't know, I served in the Marines a long time ago. Much like combat brings people together, I think that the information sharing, the alignment of incentives through a crisis, and even the investments that we've all made towards a common goal, in a lot of ways, are really what I've seen have made our relationships with suppliers a lot more strategic versus what would be transactional. Because if you came into the crisis and you had a transactional orientation where you were just trying to get the lowest price or something along those lines, you'd be leaving so much on the table and be pushed into making perverse decisions that we didn't have to, thanks to great partners.
So it helps when you come in, Kathy, I'm going to turn to you. It helps when you come in with great relationships, and it helps when a crisis keeps everyone focused on the right thing, right? Let's separate some of the BS here, and let's focus on the right thing to do. How does that change going forward? Is that sustainable? Do we go back to the dinners and the drinks and all the sales stuff of the past? How do things change as we move forward on this front?
Well, I think you said it exactly right. Like when I'm coming at this from a healthcare perspective, but when we think of, in our partnerships with customer and retailers, when we think of, the people who use these products, it's moms, dads, caregivers. There's nothing we totally get that they want to have what they need in their home in case somebody they love or themselves, in case somebody gets sick. So we all share in an understanding of that. And all of the things that you said around what constitutes and what builds a great relationship around the personal connection and joint strategic planning and all of the informal connections. My experience through, especially the early months of the pandemic, where I was so grateful that we had invested that time and effort so that we could shorthand it. Tylenol experienced over 600% increase in demand. And, it wasn't just how do we get product to you and here are all the things that we're doing to expand capacity. It's that, listen, I need you to take a pause a bit because we're sending this product to hospitals. We're sending this to hotspots and we're going to reduce our assortment dramatically so that the throughput in the factories can be sped up. And so those conversations they weren't calendared conversations. They weren't PowerPoint decks. They were calls at 10 o'clock at night that says, if you send a truck, my partner retailer, if you send a truck to our facility, you can pick it up and take it directly to your store and bypass our distribution centers, and just shorthanded all of the creative solutions that really makes you wonder now, right, about our rituals and how we operate and sort of how we establish these annual calendars of connections and communications and ways of working that, I think some of it has its rightful place in relationship building, but some of it, I think this experience shines a light on, the small efforts to build trust and relationship really do add up. And, we have to find a bit of a way to get out of our own way and without needing a crisis to generate it.
Kathy, if I can add to that, if I was to pull out a few threads of what was different about these last 10 months, I think all of us obsessively focused on what's right for the customer, right? There was no debate about it. We had to get the product. We had to get the right product. If she wanted Tylenol, we were going to. So that was one. Second, we didn't let the way we did business get in the way. The past, right? It was, what do we change in the supply chain? How do we make a decision quickly? Let's take more risk. It was a very different cadence. And none of that required, by the way, I think if we had done a JBP to plan for COVID, we would have been miserable failures at it. Right? And I think we should step back and say, is there a different mode of working here? Can we find a customer back, 2 or 3 things, challenge the supply chain, and see if we can make a step change every year?
Can't disagree with that.
We're starting to get provocative there, and I think that's where the business is going to change going forward, right? Not going back to normal, but how we apply these lessons. Related to that, I was talking with a CEO earlier this week who mentioned that he feels like his relationships, this was on the CPG side, with retail CEOs, is actually stronger now than it was beforehand. He said, when I need to talk to a CEO, there's no getting on a plane, there's no entourage coming with me. We get on a Zoom, we have a discussion, we talk about what we're dealing with, we talk about the business issues, and we're actually in a stronger place today than we were prior to COVID, and we've streamlined our relationship development. Has that been your experience as well on both sides here?
I would say absolutely. The ability to put personal relationships and face-to-face interactions in its appropriate place, where there's so much value in looking someone in the eye and sharing a meal together. There's tremendous value in that. But since that wasn't possible, being able to adapt to digital platforms and connections have made conversations not require a plane ride, not require a frequency, but to be very timely and intimate. We've seen that even in, like I mentioned before, in R&D, where we'd be iterating on a product, we could ship that overnight and do virtual cuttings and increase the frequency and touch points with customers in a way that when there was so much emphasis on face-to-face, that you would sometimes stage your communications. Now it feels very fluid, and the idea of information flow and transmission feels instantaneous and on a just-in-time basis.
Kathy, you mentioned you're coming at this obviously from a healthcare perspective. Are all categories created equal here, or are there certain categories, certain products that are more difficult to navigate in this environment than others?
Well, our portfolio is an unusual one in that on one end of the spectrum, it's fully, in the CPG space, it's fully healthcare focused, and it's Listerine and Band-Aid and Tylenol and Zyrtec and a lot of OTC drugs. And on the far other end of the spectrum, we're a skin health and beauty business with Neutrogena, Aveeno, Johnson's Baby, et cetera. And you talk about worlds apart, those two experiences this year. We have the biggest sun care business in the US, and spring break got canceled and lots of people weren't going to the beach. And so we have aspects of our business that were very seriously impacted. And just the fact that, women aren't wearing makeup and you're wearing masks. And so we have a large segment of our Neutrogena business impacted by that. But the flip side of it is, and it's just a happenstance that our portfolio is such that we had one that was impacted and one that was dramatically, had dramatic increases in demand. And so we're navigating those, the consumer and category differences and doing the best, just like everyone else, is to try and predict demand in which no one has a crystal ball. We're doing the best we can with the aid of some support, but the dynamics of our business are wildly different on both ends of the spectrum.
And Dean, everybody has a challenging supply chain. You've got a really challenging one, right? You've got everything from the retailer on one end to the farmer on the other end. These are powerful constituencies. Where is that working well in this environment? Where is that challenged?
Well, the hardest part is the flexibility. When you have a living supply chain and a perishable supply chain, you the ability to adapt to surges and changes in demand is just tremendous. We've seen on our rancher, cattle, farmer side just tremendous resilience and flexibility. Some of them are economically challenged through the crisis. We did some things to fund them to make sure that they can make it through hard times, and they've responded very positively. There was a time in which the supply chain looked particularly challenged. Their resilience and perseverance and some of the support that we've given really helped. And on the other end, working with our customers, there were instances where we were seeing the market run up on a variety of products that we sell, and we ended up having to set caps on prices that we would charge for certain things to make sure that people could eat, and also we didn't ultimately inadvertently crush demand. Ultimately, where we're going, you might be able to gather a bit from my background, is that we want this to be digitized, not only so we can be reactive throughout the supply chain more aggressively, but we also want to get to where we can be predictive, so that when Vivek or other customers are just about to hit a keystroke to order something, the truck is pulling up at their back door. Those are investments that we'd started making a while back and paid off some during the crisis, and we're going to continue to make sure that we have the flexibility for the future.
Let me ask, and Vivek, I'm going to start with you. This is great. We've navigated this, I think, as well as many could hope for. But let's also be candid. There is some friction in the relationship between retailers and manufacturers. But in the spirit of being candid and constructive, what might you pinpoint right now as one of those friction areas that we've got to resolve together? And I'm going to ask Dean and Kathy to do the same thing. Where is some of that friction right now that needs to be resolved?
Yeah, I don't know if it's friction. I just think of it as an opportunity, Jeff. And I'll go back to how I started the conversation about the customer wanting to buy things very differently. And today we are set up, our entire asset structure is set up to optimize things from farm to the store. But she's actually wanting it to be sorted out till the home, right? So to me, I think over the next few years, we've got to step back and think about the end-to-end supply chain and how we optimize the whole, right? I think we've got wasted assets on that front. And then I think we also, in my opinion, across all our businesses, we waste a lot of what I'll call revenue generating dollars. I know it. I knew it from the CPG side, and I see it now that I think we can all become a lot more efficient on revenue generating dollars that can give us a competitive advantage if we work differently together. I mean the funds that we put against it,
Okay. Kathy, Dean, any response to that? I mean, Dean, obviously you talked about the digitization that needs to happen, but your thoughts on where some of those things are that we, as Vivek's saying, we've got to resolve over the next couple of years?
Well, I would add to that the ROI on every dollar we spend is such that it's mutually beneficial. So it's, I think in the past it's been about, what works in a retail environment from a margin perspective may or may not align to what is margin accretive to the manufacturer. But I think we're finding that there are all kinds of opportunity for us to be at the table together and say, what do we initiate here that's accretive on both sides, and share the data that we know is available that proves that out. And the last thing I would say, which is just like a bit of a blinding flash of the obvious that we went through early in this year, is assortment. I mean, the nature of CPG in a lot of ways is to build the business through line extensions. And the first thing we did when confronted with a supply chain that was global and needed to be local and, lacking some of the agility that we really needed, is to carve that assortment down. And, our business did not suffer for that. And so some of this is just kind of looking at some of what have been common practices, I think, over decades, and then understanding where are we generating true value for the consumer, and then building margin accretive businesses together. I think there's opportunity for us there.
Yeah, I would agree. Just if I could add, Jeff, if you don't mind, I think of these strategic relationships as the 3 I's: the information sharing, the alignment of incentives and then investments. And with partners like Albertsons, the move to omni-channel has been beneficial to us. With our food service business and our retail business, we have a lot of consumer insights. So we've been very open to sharing things that we're seeing in trends, but we do need to be able to meet the customer wherever the consumer, wherever they want their food and however they want it to be delivered. And for us, we do a lot of packaged prepared foods. There's also a job to be done in the deli and other places of actually prepping food and cooking it and putting it in a ready format. So the collaboration around how we invest and how we support each other's incentives, that sort of communication collaboration with folks like Albertsons, where we've been very transparent in the joint business planning process, have really played themselves out well. I think it can only be improved even as we invest in things like sustainable packaging and making our products more accessible and lowering kind of the joint ecological footprint of the work that we do related to sustainability.
Well, as I listen to you, as I see Vivek nodding his head on some of these things, that sharing of data, that transparency, I think to focus on things that are mutually beneficial, that's what I'm hearing. I don't think that's new. We've always wanted that, but perhaps right now in a crisis, we're seeing some of the upside of being a little bit more transparent going forward and driving that focus going forward. You mentioned, well, before I get to this, I just want to mention we've got about 400 people participating in this session. I encourage everyone, we're going to leave some time at the end. If you've got some questions, please submit those in the Q&A, and we're going to get to a handful of those here at the end. But I just want to move to our final segment, which is really about the consumer. And Dean, you were hitting on some of the changes, right, that we've got to adapt to. The obvious one is e-commerce, whether that comes in the form of click and collect, delivery, whatever that may be. We've all seen it take off here. Vivek, I'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys have responded to that shift in behavior and what's next in that environment?
Yeah, so we were behind, right? And so when I joined here in 2019, we put a big push into e-commerce, added resources, brought talent in, shifted a lot of digital and physical investment into that side of the business. And the pandemic has helped us accelerate it. So I would think that the overall food e-commerce has probably been pulled forward 2 to 3 years, right? Whatever that number was in 25, assume that's going to happen in 22. So that's how I think about the scale of the business. If you're good at it as a retailer, I think you'll find it's incremental. It's you get market share because you do that really well. What's next is doing e-commerce without compromising profitability, Jeff. And we're getting into automation. We're getting into rethinking the supply chain, et cetera, so that you can still get it to a home or get it into a car without compromising profitability. And then I think companies like us who have labor around fresh in stores can start customizing solutions for customers. So you can get the cut of meat you want, or you can get the cake baked the way you want. There's going to be that search for differentiation in e-commerce as we go forward, not setting aside just the packaged goods where you may not be able to differentiate as much.
Dean, Kathy, obviously e-commerce is big for everyone and a part of your thinking. But where else, perhaps there, but where else have you seen changes in consumer behavior over the last 6 months, and what are you expecting to see stick?
Kathy, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go ahead. A couple of things. Localization, just a growing preference for local, which I think creates really interesting opportunity for neighborhood grocery. And as long as you're delivering on the growing expectations of convenience, which is kind of now table stakes. Then if you add to that the personalization that comes from local or regional grocery, I think that becomes an advantage. And, our ability to work on solutions together that raise that advantage is a really awesome current trend. And one thing that we haven't talked about, but it was concurrent with everything that's been happening with the pandemic, is this very, very sharp focus on racial and social injustice that's happening right alongside everyone's concerns about their health and wellness. And we serve a very diverse consumer population, and it's not a moment in time. It's a real movement. So we're looking at everything from internal and external and partnerships and products, and are we working with Black dermatologists? Just every little piece of our business to make sure that the products and services and experiences that all of our consumers have are authentic. And that's I wouldn't describe that as a trend. I would describe that as a movement that is essential for our businesses to get behind in order to thrive.
Yeah. Kathy, I'm going to say this not just because I started my career at Johnson & Johnson and you're on, but the crisis has accelerated a number of trends that we think were already in place. Food as medicine. The idea of being really deliberate about what you put in your body. I think that when there's a pandemic, people have a heightened sense of health. Our supply chain is perishable, and as Vivek said, as we're thinking about omnichannel or e-commerce, we have a unique challenge in making sure that we can deliver the freshest, best products. And I think Kathy's point about local, we do see consumers very aware of proximity and even traceability. They want to have an intimacy with the products that they consume, and so we have a lot of thoughts around how we can provide a lot more transparency into the supply chain. And then and it's hard to argue the attention that's come to the environmental footprint of producing food. I can't directly correlate how the crisis accelerated that, other than maybe having people have more time to research where their food comes from. But the environmental footprint we've invested in heavily in beef sustainability and packaging and a variety of things to make both the footprint of our materials less, but also more accessible to things like e-commerce. And a lot of those trends converge for us, so that we can better service the customer with a better product that with more transparency that show up at the doorstep.
I think you guys have hit on a critical point, and Dean, you hit on it from the kind of the climate sustainability aspect. Kathy, you're coming at it from a social justice aspect. I know Vivek's passionate about these issues. The consumer has the power to hold brands accountable. And that's what, to me, when I look at what we can do through our association, where retailers and manufacturers can work together, is so much around the purpose of this industry. This is an industry that is championing consumers day in and day out, whether it's on diversity and inclusion, whether it's on climate, whether it's on packaging. We got more we can do. We've got strides we've got to make. But there's an example, I think, of where we need to work together in even more aligned fashion around the purpose of this industry and proving to consumers that we're their champion. We're a champion for a lot of consumers, for a lot of our employees right now. And I want to transition to the last portion here to get the vaccines that they need. All of our companies are looking at this issue, J&J a little bit uniquely in how you look at this issue. But I want to talk about this. Obviously, vaccine allocation and distribution is the 800-pound gorilla right now when it comes to what's going to happen over the next couple of months. Vivek, from an Albertsons perspective, you've already gone out there and talked about distributing vaccines through in-store pharmacies when they're available. Can you talk a little bit about how much of your attention is going into this issue and the Albertsons plan when those vaccines are available?
A significant part of it, Jeff. We are working with every single state to make sure that we are able to we are first ready for it from a training standpoint, from a storage capacity standpoint, et cetera. Having the capacity to do it not only in our stores, but outside our stores. So we're putting a lot of energy into it. We want to be there to serve the community. We are an important part of that local community, and we are going to be ready to serve it. And we're building the capacity to do it.
Kathy, Dean, obviously, Kathy, let me just start with you. You've got unique insights, right? You've got a workforce that needs the vaccine. You got another part of the workforce that's building the vaccine. From a J&J standpoint, your expectations and some of your plans when it comes to vaccine distribution.
So, we have a large pharmaceutical group that's been dedicated to this effort on the vaccine since January. And I'm sure you've heard in the press many times that typically a vaccine to market is a 7+ year process. So this is truly unprecedented speed, and it's great to see all these companies invested in it. So what we anticipate and hope to see is that in January we'll have an interim positive read in our clinical studies and be part of the global solution with the vaccine, both obviously here in the U.S. with our own employees, but also around the world.
Dean, you've got a frontline workforce that is, when you look at a lot of meat facilities vis-a-vis other types of facilities, there are areas where people are closer in working than in some other environments. This is a workforce that needs the vaccine as early as humanly possible. Of course, after healthcare professionals get that. Can you talk a little bit about what Tyson is doing to make sure that we're certainly working together, but what you're doing to make sure that your essential workforce gets access to that vaccine?
Yeah, I'll emphasize up front that we know that frontline medical workers, we know that nursing homes are being prioritized. We understand that. But getting food on everyone's plate is just so critical. And you'd mentioned, our frontline workers and their value. We know we're going to have priority in getting the vaccine. We'd invested really months and probably more than half a year ago in hiring a chief medical officer. We've established clinics in some of our facilities. We've about 3 months ago had put out specs for hundreds of nurses to make sure that we can initially put on our always on testing program so that we could randomly test and make sure that we're keeping those that are sick out of the facility. But that'll also become really valuable when the vaccine is available to make sure that it's distributed. And I'm sure Kathy and Vivek are in the same position that they're really, much like through the crisis, the key for us is education and availability. The protective measures we've seen become very effective, but we know that it's not going to be any reason in the world not to have everyone vaccinated as soon as possible. We're excited about having it available. We just want to make sure people can make an educated, informed decision to take care of themselves. Much like all of the other precautions, we just wanted to do everything we can to give access, and unfortunately, it sounds like that's going to happen in just the months to come.
Let me close with this. We've got some Q&A coming in. We'll get to those in a moment. But let me close with this. Fast forward a year from now. A year ago, most of us didn't see COVID on the horizon. But fast forward a year from now, retailers and manufacturers, the three of you get back together for a conversation like this. What are we talking about? What's the discussion 12 months from now? What do you think is really going to take precedence? Vivek, you go first.
Be nice to say cheers over a drink, and not worry about anything else for a few seconds there. I think this. I tell people there's nothing magical about 2019. So when it's not going to go back to 2019, customers are going to establish new behaviors, and I think we'll be talking about growth. We'll be talking about e-commerce. We'll be talking about innovating for them when they're eating their 2 or 3 extra meals at home than they did in the past. We'll be talking about maintaining their health. I think those will be the nature of the conversation. I'm just hoping we get back to talking about those positive things on an everyday basis.
I miss having a drink with you, so as do others. Kathy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I hope we're talking about is that we didn't waste this momentum. That there's a lot that's been learned here, and it's a lot about leadership and shedding some corporate bureaucracy and rituals that honestly seem to have added little value, and really getting focused on working backward from the consumer instead of, building a lot of corporate initiatives that hopefully land positively with her. I think it's a different way of thinking about it. And I worry about this, but I'm hopeful about it too, that when we're all together, whenever we're together, that we say that was the spark that generated a much more progressive and consumer focused, common sense way of working, and that we were able to shed some non-value added stuff.
Yep. Dean, anything you want to add to that?
Jeff, I would say it now, and then we'll also say it in a year. Thank you for folks like Vivek and Kathy and you, who are all helping us navigate this. I think in a year, we will hopefully be saying thank you in a retrospective way for what we've all done together. For all of us who've been able to both take care of our team members, produce, be flexible, and continue to invest strategically, I think we'll catapult out of this. I think the hope, I'm going to steal Kathy's term that I heard yesterday, the jailbreak term, that the feeling that the world's going to have when we can all come together. Again, a lot of times people come together over food. I'm excited to do that with all of you. I don't know what food that'll be. We can decide at that point. But I think there's going to be a lot of hope, not only for being past the crisis, but for the barriers, as Kathy said, that we've knocked down, that we've realized were unnecessary, and we can carry that momentum into the future.
So let me build on that. We've got about 8 minutes left here, a little less than that, with just some of the Q&A. Speaking of one of the barriers, one of the questions that came in was around sharing data between organizations and how that can become a critical part of the relationship between retailers and manufacturers. What is changing on the sharing of data? What needs to change? I'll throw that out to all three of you.
I'll start. We obviously, because we're building packaged foods and having to plan those in advance and get them out and be ahead of trends. Through the crisis, we've taken some of that and applied it to what we've learned through COVID and started overtly sharing with all of our customers, and that's turned out to be incredibly valuable. And some of the data that's historically protected by retailers, they've been more willing to share around what's happening in point of sale timing, and that has allowed us to be much more anticipatory of demand. And I think that's just tremendous. It's a tremendous kind of awakening in both the value that we can provide by having a better anticipation of demand, and then the benefit to suppliers for having a more real-time delivery of goods based upon the information they're willing to share. So that's been a really big step.
Yeah, I see the opportunity for data to be leveraged so that we can be, and I think this is largely what maybe Dean was sharing too, that we're moving from a batch type way of working and building our relationship with the consumer to an always on. And always on means you know what the next best action is. And the only way to know what the next best action is to have the data. And so I think if we kind of come together and say, how are we following her through her journey from consideration all the way through to loyalty, post-purchase all the way into loyalty, and we know what is the next best thing to do. And that sort of shines a light. To me, that shines a light on what's the kind of data sharing that allows us to maximize the potential of that, and less a traditional linear way of, viewing the consumer journey and understanding that she's always on, we now have to be always on. And so we're going to have to be much more fluid in terms of our proposition with her.
Vivek, you're sitting on some of that great data, but there's a competitive issue as well. So what's your approach?
Yeah, Jeff, I think technology is enabling it. So the power is really putting all our first-party data, third-party data together, cleaning it up, making it seamlessly available. So we're going through that. We're cleaning it up, putting it on the cloud. And that's when I think I love Kathy's way of saying it's always on, right? It's not, I'm going to give you a bunch of data, analyze it, and tell me what to do the next 3 months. But it's always on data. When we have it on the cloud, we have the data lake on the cloud, and that'll allow it. And so I think you're going to see in the next year or two, all of us working on pools of data that we can access and connecting solutions and algorithms to that.
And Jeff, if I can just add to what Vivek said there, I think it's on both parties. I think we can provide an always-on better perspective as to what's going on in our supply chain. And when we do that together, we go beyond interactive and reactive to predictive. I come from a background where we churn through, terabytes and terabytes of data, and to be able to develop insights and direction and predictions that none of us could have done alone. And what feeds that is us all operating in a more transparent and collaborative way.
Kathy, you talked before about Skew rationalization. How does Skew rationalization and innovation work side by side, right? If we're optimizing, if we're reducing, how does innovation work alongside that?
Well, I think we have to hold a mirror to ourselves and say, what's real innovation, and be tougher on what real innovation, constitutes. And if we hold that tough lens, then I think there's a natural inclination to focus our energies on those products and services that provide a truly new and unique end benefit to the consumer, not a nuance. And so a lot of the tail of assortment comes from nuanced innovations that aren't significantly different enough from the base business to generate the right kind of business for either of us. And we've learned a pretty big lesson. A lot of the reason we simplified the business in March, April was because we had no choice. We had social distancing in our factories that didn't allow us to run every piece of equipment. And we had to make some hard calls. And it's really interesting that our business has done really well when we've held on to, tail SKUs that, obviously, the consumer has found value in other aspects of our assortment. I think we just that has to be more of a muscle that we flex all the time, that it's not occasion based.
An enormous thank you to each of you. Thank you for the insights. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this. When I heard a couple of things, one, and I hear this from all of your peers as well, an enormous sense of pride in your workforce, in the people that you're surrounded by every day, and what they've done to rise to the occasion during this extraordinary situation. I think, and Vivek, you spoke to it early on, the consumer is the North Star. Everyone says it, but I think COVID has demonstrated it, right? To the extent that we are following where the consumer is going, and when I say follow, I say that in an active way. We're going to be fine as an industry, as opposed to trying to take them where we want to take them. And I think that came through loud and clear. And this third area is around partnership, the opportunity of the things that we can do together, trusting one another that we are pursuing some of the same things. We talked about purpose a little while ago. I think there's an enormous opportunity around partnership, around purpose. We're going to pursue that together, and we look forward to doing that. So thank you to each of the three of you for your participation. To those that are with us today, we welcome your feedback. Please send any comments you may have to education@consumerbrandsassociation.org. Again, a big thank you to PwC for their sponsorship of this entire series, and for Channel Advisor for their sponsorship of today's session. Our final session is next Thursday, December 17th, where we'll have 4 CEOs from Church & Dwight, Freshpet, Milo's Tea, and Morton Salt as they reflect on 2020 and what they've learned, and what we can take away from that together. For more information, please go to consumerbrandsassociation.org/CPG Speaks. Kathy, Vivek, Dean, thank you. Happy holidays. Really appreciate your support.
To you too. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Happy holidays.
Bye, everyone.